I hate Five Nights at Freddy's. Oh no. Achoo! Oh god. All of a sudden I have a burning urge to talk about Garten of Ban. Oh no. I feel another one coming on. Achoo! What the? Oh no, too far back. Blue UHYEAH, bring me some pepper so I can force myself to sneeze. Shit, I forgot he didn't exist back then. Well, guess I'm stuck like this forever. You know, I guess this is the end of the video. Achoo! Ooh, jeez, that really messed with my head. What was I saying before? Oh yeah, I love Five Nights at Freddy's. Ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between, welcome to a very special month-long channel event. One that I have definitely never tried doing before. Nope, not even once. This is UHYEAH Season OG FNAF Month 2. Because if Fortnite can bank on your nostalgia, then so can I. Yeah. I thought you said we've never done this before. What's with the 2 in the logo? Hey, by any chance, do you know what Granny is? What? Like, are you asking me if I know my own grandma? What a stupid question. Now, are you gonna answer my question? Wow, we really are in the past. I could get used to this. I guess I should probably explain what's going on here, though. In celebration of Springtrap joining Dead by Daylight as a killer, a brand new FNAF movie coming out later this year, and a whole ass new FNAF game coming out later this month, I thought June would be the perfect time to give FNAF month another go. All month long, I'll be uploading nothing but FNAF videos, so hopefully you'll be seeing me more than usual, at least for a bit. Also, as you may have noticed, all of the visuals, editing, titles, and thumbnails this month will be themed after Season 1 of UHYEAH. Not only did I think it would just be fun, but I also thought it fit the vibe a little better. Anyway, with all of that out of the way, please enjoy the first video of UHYEAH Season OG FNAF Month 2. Also, don't forget to subscribe. Okay, thanks, bye. The fascination for beta versions of popular video games has been around for ages at this point. And I mean, can you blame people? Looking behind the curtain and seeing all the little things that changed or didn't make the final cut is endlessly interesting, especially for games with long development periods or drastic creative changes mid-production. But how do we, the consumers, even see these beta versions of games? Well, sometimes they leak, completely without the permission of the original developer. I feel like this is how beta content gets out there most of the time, especially if it comes in the form of a playable build. Other times, however, the developer themselves will release bits and pieces of beta content on their own terms, or hell, even release a game early in its beta state for testing purposes. There are a lot of ways this stuff can get out there, that's for sure. But sometimes we never see beta content from certain games, and one of those games is the original Five Nights at Freddy's. Now, don't get it twisted. We do know some stuff about the beta version of this game, but it's all scattered around different sources, and any sort of direct beta gameplay has never been shared by Scott Cawthon, nor has anything ever leaked. With all of that said though, Five Nights at Freddy's is in a bit of a weird position compared to pretty much every other game out there. Fans have spent over a decade at this point making FNAF fan games, directly working in the exact same engine the original game was created in. This means that literally thousands of people not only have a strong understanding of FNAF 1's art style, mechanics, and code, but could also probably recreate the entire game from scratch if they really wanted to. Okay, so how does this tie into FNAF beta content? Well, even though we really only have breadcrumbs of what a FNAF 1 beta could have possibly looked like, we still have said breadcrumbs. If a team of people wanted to take the things we know about the beta and recreate a version of FNAF 1 with all of those changes implemented, they very well could do that with shocking accuracy to the released game. Too bad nobody's ever done that before though. Well, I guess we have to end the video here again. Just kidding, of course a group of people have done this. This is FNAF fans we're talking about. If you think something exists, it probably does. Remember Night Shift at Chungus's? Yeah, enough said. Anyway, the absolute legends over at FNAF Beta Stuff have done just that and made a full recreation of FNAF 1, just with all the assumed beta content being implemented. Not only have they done FNAF 1, but they've also done FNAF 2, and I think they're working on FNAF 3. I'm just focusing on the first game for this video, but the the FNAF 2 beta recreation is actually how I found out about these guys in the first place. It looks really cool. That being said though, the first game always felt the most mysterious to me, especially when considering the stuff that was potentially scrapped from it before release. So I really just wanted to take a good look at the first beta and go over everything it has to offer. For the most part, this is pretty much just going to be an overview of FNAF 1, but everything is just slightly wrong, which I think is actually super interesting. Not only just to see what the more drastic changes are, but also to see the tiny details you may not even notice at first glance. With all of that out of the way, how about we actually talk a little bit about the context behind the changes on display in this beta recreation. As stated on the itch page, this FNAF beta recreation presents to you their vision of what Five Nights at Freddy's may have looked like on June 30th, 2014. 2 weeks after Scott Cawthon published the first trailer for the game on his YouTube channel. This scenario makes the build from about a little over a month before launch in August 2014. Because of this, the changes on display here are, for the most part, pretty subtle. But even with that in mind, there still are some pretty large changes here that, even if they are cool, might be a bit unrealistic given the short time period from this beta to the game's launch. I don't really care that much though, and the FNAF 1 trailer does have some pretty weird stuff in it that doesn't appear in the final game at all, so who really knows? No matter how you look at it, trying to figure out what the game may have looked like at this awkward stage in development is no easy task. So I think the team over at FNAF Beta Stuff did a pretty stellar job keeping things somewhat realistic while also making sure that things were actually different enough to be interesting. And that's pretty much all the background you need to know to understand this fan game. No point in wasting any more time here. Let's jump straight into this thing. Strap in, folks, because this is the Five Nights at Freddy's beta. Kinda. What better way to start this than to talk about all the neat changes done to the visuals in this game. It looks pretty much the exact same as the final game, however, the changes are there and they do stack up quite a bit. I can't think of a better place to start off than the main menu. The FNAF 1 main menu will forever be iconic, even if it's pretty damn simple. Still, this exact same kind of menu was not only replicated in some of the subsequent entries in the series, but also replicated by probably hundreds of thousands of fan games, both big and small. Even though this menu is pretty much the exact same, there still are some differences here, mainly seen in the main man himself, Freddy. The render used in this beta is overall a little darker in terms of lighting, and the eyes are completely dimmed out, in comparison to the more bright eyes seen in the actual render. That really isn't super interesting though, let's be real. What is super interesting here though, is the inclusion of red, glowing pupils in Freddy's Twitch animation he occasionally does on this screen. This, my friends, is one of our first examples of real FNAF beta content being used as inspiration for this project. Back in the day, to get a game on Steam, you'd first have to go through a round of approvals known as Steam Greenlight. Basically, you used to be able to browse a bunch of games being submitted to Steam and vote on if you wanted them to be sold on the platform or not. It was kind of cozy, but it's also a little bit archaic looking back at it now. And I don't even know if it would be feasible anymore, especially with the sheer amount of indie games being made these days. Anyway, in 2014, when FNAF was being made, Steam Greenlight was still around, and thus had to be listed on the page in order to be made available on Steam. The actual page isn't super noteworthy, but what is noteworthy is this weird picture of Freddy used for the icon of the game here. Not only is he lacking his suit head, but the endoskeleton head that is there has these weird red pupils not seen anywhere in the final game. The FNAF Beta Stuff guys took this idea and implemented it into a couple of Freddy's animations, mainly the twitching on the title screen like I already mentioned, but also on both of his jump scares. This does not carry over onto his normal camera renders though. Those still use the white glowing pupils seen in the final game. Maybe you can interpret this as some sort of mid-change thing, where this hypothetical Scott Cawthon decided to change the endoskeleton eyes to white, but hadn't finished re-rendering certain parts of the game yet. Something fun to think about. Even though these red eyes don't appear in the normal cameras for Freddy, they do actually show up for one of Bonnie's rare renders, which is pretty cool. They do have the same endoskeleton model after all. Enough about the main menu though. What about the actual game? As soon as you get into the office, there are some very glaring omissions right off the bat. For starters, pretty much the entire UI is not implemented. Not only is the symbol at the bottom of the screen that lets you know where to pull up the camera gone, but the UI letting you know how much power you have and how much power you're using is completely missing. These are some pretty simple changes to remove considering they're just 2D assets, and it does make the game feel a whole lot more unfinished. So I think this was actually a good idea. It's not like how you pull up the camera has changed or anything. And if you're playing this, you've 100% played something else FNAF related before. So there's like a 99.9% chance you won't be confused. Even though the power UI is completely gone from the main office, it's still featured on the camera UI specifically, which I guess technically makes more sense, but isn't super convenient. Other than that stuff though, the office remains pretty much the exact same. It's missing the cupcake on the desk, the poster is different, and the window renders of Bonnie and Chica when you use the flashlight are ever so slightly changed. But that's pretty much it. Now, you may have noticed that we're kind of missing an entire button here from each door, but we'll talk about that more later when I go over the gameplay changes. Just try your best to ignore it for now, which I know might be a little hard. It is very strange. Anyway, enough about the office, at least until we go over the jump scares. It's time to dive into the main meat of the art assets seen in this project, the camera rack. Aha, just kidding, not quite yet. Before we can actually do that, I should probably talk a little bit about the camera UI itself, since it is pretty different from the actual game. For starters, the map UI is completely different from the released game, featuring small circles to click onto to access the cameras, rather than the labeled squares you're probably used to. While I think the squares are definitely better overall, considering it makes it way easier to remember specific rooms in the building, I also really like how these circles have a visual indicator showing where exactly in the rooms the camera is looking. It's actually pretty useful in regards to understanding your surroundings better. The other change I want to mention here is that the clock now counts down the minutes for each hour of a night. I've actually talked about a game with a somewhat similar idea before, that being Endless Inside of all things. In that game, it's literally just a number timer that counts down from like 300, but here, it's presented a lot nicer. Just like I said in that video, I'm a little mixed on if I like this or not, but for FNAF 1 specifically, I think not knowing how close you are to the next hour is kind of part of the magic. When you have a better estimate on how close you are to the next hour, it definitely makes things a whole lot less stressful. That's for sure. Anyway, enough about the UI. Let's actually talk about the renders now. Before I can talk about any of the nitty-gritty details here, I think we have to finally address the fact that Foxy isn't in this game. Yeah. Taking into account the hypothetical time frame this fan beta is supposed to be from, Foxy was actually never shown off or talked about in any promo material up till that point. Very famously, Bonnie actually takes Foxy's place in the original FNAF 1 trailer, running down the hallway the same way he does. This fan game doesn't do that, which makes sense considering that Bonnie running down the hallway wasn't actually gameplay and was most likely just for the trailer and nothing else. However, even though this game lacks Foxy and Bonnie doesn't take his place, his mechanic is still in this version of the game. How, you may be asking? By replacing him with a completely new character, Wolf. Yup. Down at Pirate's Cove, you won't find Foxy chilling, but instead, this very similar Wolf character. He still keeps the pirate theme from Foxy, but trades the eye patch for a straight up pirate hat. Wolf is also a lot more functional looking and much less broken down. Even with that in mind though, this Wolf character is still supposedly out of order, going off the fact the sign outside the cove is still there. Other than appearance though, this guy works the exact same way as Foxy. He is effectively the same character. So what the hell is the deal here? Well, it's pretty common knowledge at this point that Scott Cawthon wasn't super sure what animal Foxy was going to be when he was first thinking of the cast of Five Nights at Freddy's. The other three came to him fairly easily, but that last oddball character was really stumping him. Before he eventually settled on Foxy, Scott Cawthon considered both a beaver and a wolf in that role, which was revealed during that first iconic interview with Dawko. We really don't know how far either of these characters got into production. Like, personally, I think neither of these guys were modeled at all, but it's definitely fun to think of what could have been. So, with that established, the team over at FNAF Beta Stuff decided they would take advantage of the unique opportunity they had fallen into considering when in the FNAF development timeline their fan beta takes place, and replace Foxy with this wolf character that never came to be. Now, do I think it's even remotely likely that a build a little over a month away from FNAF's launch had a whole ass wolf character fully modeled, animated, and implemented, only to be completely scrapped and replaced? No, not at all. However, I can't prove that. So having this wolf character in the game is actually a lot of fun. I think it was a really smart idea, and probably helped bring a lot more eyes to this project compared to if they just tweaked some of Foxy's animations or renders. Speaking of renders, I think the wolf actually gets some pretty decent ones. The render of him about to run away from Pirate's Cove is really clean, but the render of him hiding in the curtains is genuinely amazing. I love how engulfed he is in the shadows. It's also a really good use of those shiny white pupils these guys have. A+ stuff. The actual running animation is very similar to Foxy's, nothing to say there. But the jump scare is actually completely different, opting to go for a more standard close-up jump scare similar to the rest of the cast. This is actually a really clever idea. I could genuinely believe that Scott may have made a normal jump scare for Foxy at first, before realizing, wait, this doesn't really make that much sense, and changing it to the farther away one we're all used to. So yeah, overall, great character swap, and I genuinely believe it adds a lot to the vibe of this fan beta. Now, I know what you're probably just dying to know. What about the beaver? Well, we'll talk more about them a little bit later, don't you worry. For now, how about we finally get into those smaller render details? While we're already on the topic of the wolf, here's something kind of related to them. You all know about the infamous phrase scattered around FNAF 1, "It's me." It's insanely iconic at this point. Well, considering this is really just a small text thing, and could easily be swapped, this version of the game, as far as I can tell, replaces every instance of "It's me" with "No Way Out." The only place where it doesn't do that seems to be at Pirate's Cove, which just removes any form of the sign Easter egg entirely. I could be wrong about that, but I couldn't find any texture for it looking in the game files multiple times. I don't have anything to say about this, I just thought it was neat. This one is a lot more general, but a lot of the renders for the cameras were altered to be slightly worse. Nothing drastic, and some of these changes don't even really affect the quality that much, but playing the game like this just feels super weird. Like the title probably says, this is really just FNAF, but everything is wrong. Now, that isn't a bad thing, it's 100% what they were going for, but it's just so bizarre playing a version of this game with 80% of the camera renders being ever so slightly different. And then on the other side of the coin, you have some renders that are drastically different from the release version of the game. I'm mainly talking about the parts and service room here, which has completely different character renders, because the render of the actual room is from a completely different angle. Now this is trippy. A small tweak to a room or a character pose is one thing, but this is something else. It's very clearly the exact same room layout-wise as the final version as well. This, by extension, also means the game over screen, which takes place in the same room, is also at this new angle. It's also lacking the eyes popping out of the Freddy suit that make that render so iconic. So I think this room specifically being different actually works very well here in the context of the beta. Like sure, maybe Scott would want to change this camera angle a month before launch, and while he's at it, update the game over screen to be more gruesome. Like fuck it, I believe it. Now, while there really isn't much gameplay to go off of in the singular trailer that the FNAF Beta Stuff team had to work from, there still is some gameplay, and you bet your ass they recreated whatever they could. Most of the gameplay in that first trailer is actually pretty similar to the final game, so there isn't actually that much to talk about here. However, there is one gameplay shot in particular that is somewhat different and is faithfully recreated in this game. The original FNAF 1 trailer features this shot of Bonnie standing in the hallway being engulfed in shadows, which is obviously something that can happen in the final release of the game. However, the render here is completely different to this trailer, having Bonnie even deeper in the shadows to the point where it's actually kind of hard to notice it's even him. So yeah, the fan beta uses this older, more clear looking version of the render. Really neat they did this, but I can totally see why Scott edited this one before the release of the game. Alright, we're almost done with the visuals, but before I wrap up here, how about we talk about those jump scares? Not that there's that much to talk about here, but I mean, come on, it's a FNAF game. We gotta talk about the jump scares. I've actually already kind of done the heavy lifting here in earlier parts of this video. I already went over both Freddy jump scares and the wolf jump scare. So all that's left is Bonnie and Chica. Similar to most of their renders in this game, the jump scares themselves are very similar to the final versions. They are just ever so slightly different. That being said though, I think these are far less weird to look at than the camera renders, considering both how close they are and how fast they play in-game. Still, it's appreciated that the FNAF Beta Stuff team went out of their way to slightly tweak and reanimate these. Okay, I think that pretty much covers all the visual details I wanted to talk about. Overall, I'm quite a fan of what they've done here, and it does feel quite realistic to an extent, while also pushing a few things for the sake of making sure the experience is more interesting to play through. That is not an easy balance to strike, so round of applause for that. That was really the main stuff I wanted to talk about today. However, I would be doing you all a disservice if I didn't quickly go over the gameplay changes and the extra content. So, let's do that before we wrap up here. Alright, let's not waste any time here and get right into what you want to hear about. The fucking door buttons. I know you are probably all on the edge of your seats waiting for this one. Well, other than it kind of looking funny, I regret to inform you that all this change actually is that now you have to click on the actual doorways in order to turn the lights on. Yeah, not super interesting. Maybe it's supposed to be more of a flashlight thing here, which I guess actually makes way more sense than the massive cartoonish buttons in the final game, but I still think those are definitely better for the sake of clarity. As for the other gameplay changes, I think a really important one to talk about is the live system. This was a pretty well-known scrapped feature from the original Five Nights at Freddy's, where you would be given a set amount of lives to try and beat the whole game, and if you lost them all, you'd be sent all the way back to night 1. This was removed for very obvious reasons. Having something this punishing in a game as trial and error as Five Nights at Freddy's would be a little insane and very discouraging. But for the sake of accuracy, this mechanic was fully implemented into this beta. This makes a lot of sense, considering that the little live counter icon used for this mechanic is actually still in the release files of FNAF 1. So it's not super out there to assume the whole live system was scrapped at a later stage in development. As for my thoughts on its inclusion here, well, it's pretty annoying for actually trying to play the game, especially on those later nights. However, it is possible to disable this mechanic entirely in a secret menu, so it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. When it comes to the actual gameplay changes to the actual animatronics, there really isn't that much to talk about. Bonnie, Chica, and the wolf all act pretty much the exact same way they do in the final release version of FNAF 1. I did notice that they may be slightly more aggressive on some of the earlier nights, but by the time I got to night 4 and 5, the difficulty curve seemed to level out a bit. So I don't know, maybe I'm just rusty on my FNAF 1 knowledge. I swear they were not this aggressive early game though. As for the only remaining animatronic, Freddy, he has been given a singular gameplay change that actually changes how you play FNAF 1 pretty drastically, especially on max mode runs. Freddy can now go to either of the doors, not just the one on the right. This means you can't just do the strat where you stalk that one camera for the entire night, blocking Freddy from ever getting in. You actually have to pay way more attention to him, which definitely makes the game a little bit harder. This is a fairly simple change that I could see realistically being removed from the game close to launch for the sake of balancing. So I think it works pretty well here. And that's pretty much it for gameplay changes. It really isn't that much different from the release version of FNAF 1. For obvious reasons. You even need a copy of FNAF 1 on Steam in order to even play this thing. That's how similar it is. Anyway, we are almost done here, but there's one more thing I'd like to go over before we finish this. As I mentioned earlier, there's a secret menu you can access on the main menu by entering a certain keyboard combination. This menu has a couple neat things, like a few challenges, but it also has a toggle for an entirely new character that they added for fun. Remember that scrapped beaver version of Foxy from earlier? Well, you can put them in the game. Not only does this add a second Pirates Cove style room to the camera map, but it straight up just adds a second Foxy mechanic to keep track of for the opposite hallway. I'm a huge fan of this beaver animatronics design as well. It really feels the most unfinished or beta out of all the cast. They're pretty much just a lightly edited Freddy with blue pants and some other small details tweaked. Because of this, he looks very off, which I think is perfect actually. Oh yeah, Golden Freddy is in this game too with an entirely new jump scare for some reason. Sure, why not? Whatever, we're done here, alright. And with that, I've pretty much covered everything I wanted to here. The FNAF 1 beta fan game is a neat look into what could have been in some weird alternate universe, and genuinely serves as a decent recreation of some of FNAF 1's most iconic scrapped mechanics and characters. At some point in the future, I may cover more from the FNAF beta stuff team, because there really is a lot of cool shit to go over here. But for now, I think it's a good time to wrap this up. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time on FNAF Month. Bye, everybody.
NF number 2 is that Springtrap was one of the very first animatronics to be put into business. This explains why Springtrap is so poorly designed and engineered, and why he is so withered and old and greenish and old and so poorly designed and old, and also explains, of course, why he was hidden away